Hi, I'm Robert Shelby, Chief of Police for Shelby Township. Welcome to Straight Talk. With me today is Dr. Richard Johnson, Associate Professor from the University of Toledo. Hi, Doctor. How are you?
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. I know you had a little bit of a drive coming up this morning, and I appreciate it very much.
Sure.
And I want to talk to you about some things going on right now in law enforcement. In my 29 years of service to law enforcement, I've never seen the current state of affairs right now where I feel like the profession is continuously under attack on a day-to-day basis by the media and different politicians. And I know you've done some research on this. What has your research shown? What kind of data have you collected? And can you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay. Seeing all the media attention towards especially police use of force situations over the last year and a half or so, and several of the media newsworthy stories, Eric Garner death in New York City and the Ferguson situation, caused me to look into what's the reality of how often are use of force deaths occurring. I was seeing in New York Times and other news outlets that they were saying that there were 3,000, 7,000 deaths from police use of force annually, and that didn't really square right with what information I already was aware of. So I dug into official statistics on police use of force deaths, and they come from two different sources. One is from the FBI Uniform Crime Reports, where the majority of police departments in the United States submit annually their statistics on major categories of crime every year. And about 90% of law enforcement agencies participate in that, and that's where the FBI gets these Uniform Crime Report statistics. And one of the things they track is deaths from police justifiable homicides. That's been criticized in the media, saying since it's coming from law enforcement agencies, it can't be trusted as being honest, that they would be self-serving in what they report. Another criticism is that only 90% of police departments report this data. So I looked also then at information from the Centers for Disease Control. Centers for Disease Control tracks deaths through death certificates filled out by doctors, not by law enforcement officers, and found that actually they're pretty close. And it's 100% compliance with hospitals with the CDC. Whenever they fill out a death certificate, there's a box that they have to fill out with cause of death, and it being death by legal intervention is the category that they use. So looking at these statistics, especially heavily relying on the CDC's information, because it's less argued to be that it's unreliable because it's not coming from police departments, it's coming from doctors. What I found was, on average, there's about, over the last 10 years, the average has been 416 deaths from police use of force annually.
Okay.
Now, any death is a tragedy, so that number of people will probably still say 416 deaths are too many. But what we've got to keep in mind is law enforcement is a very dangerous profession, and police officers are assaulted on a regular basis. For instance, using those statistics from only 90% of law enforcement agencies, the Uniform Crime Reports are showing that on average every year 57,693 assaults occur on police officers every year.
Okay.
And so not all those assaults are deadly force situations. You know, some are just slapping a police officer, things like that.
Spitting on them or
Exactly,
okay.
exactly. But some form of physical assault. So they also break it down in the categories of assault with some sort of weapon. So average across the last 10 years, annually there are 19,123 assaults on police officers every single year with some form of weapon. Now again, not all those might be justifiable lethal force situations.
Okay.
So you know, it could be a table leg, it could be a car. You know, some of those situations in the right circumstances may be justifiable use of force, lethal force, and some might not. So they also further break it down into categories of assaults with a knife or a gun. That's pretty much indisputable that that's a lethal force situation. If you're attacking a police officer with a firearm or with a knife, one would expect that that's a situation where a police officer would be legally justified in defending him or herself with their firearm. And annually, across the last 10 years, that happens on average 3,277 times a year. And that's a conservative estimate because only about 90% of police departments are reporting this information.
Okay.
So if we think about that, that means if officers were just using lethal force when they're legally allowed to, we would expect to have 3,000 plus deaths from police use of force annually.
Correct.
But we're only finding, on average, from the official statistics, about 416. Now, there's a couple of situations on the internet where there are people using newspaper articles and Facebook posts and things like that to try to gather as much independent information as they can find on use of force deaths. And the most liberal estimate that's come up so far this year has been 700 deaths from police use of force. Now, there are some questions with some of that data, whether or not that's accurate, but even so, 700 deaths compared to 3,000 plus assaults on police officers with knives and guns show that in a majority of the situations, even when police officers are being assaulted with a knife or a gun, they're not killing the person who's attacking them,
Okay.
even when they're legally justified in doing so. So to say that the police have just gone nuts with use of lethal force in the United States, it's just not true. I don't find statistics for that.
Okay.
And then the issue comes up with issue of race, and that African American men specifically being disproportionately among those who are killed by police use of force.
The Black Lives Matter movement, obviously.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So I dug into that information, and 6% of the U.S. population on average is an African American man. Okay, African Americans make up a little over 12% of the population, half of that being about 6% of the U.S. population. And the sad reality is that about 28% of those who die from police use of force are African American men.
Okay.
But one needs to keep in mind that if that is a disparity, then that's assuming that African American men assault the police with a knife or a gun at the same rate everyone else does. And unfortunately, the statistics show that's just not true. For instance, when you look at official statistics from Uniform Crime Reports, 41% of those who assault the police with a knife or a gun are African American men. So they make up 6% of the population, but almost half of those who are assaulting police officers with knives and guns. And then that they end up 28% of those who are actually dying from police use of force. So even in those situations, you see examples of police restraint, that 41% of those assaulting the police with a knife or a gun are African American men, but those dying from that police use of force are only 28% African American men. Also keep in mind that 42% of all murder victims are African American men. 43% of those convicted of a murder are African American men. 54% of those killed in justifiable homicides by a citizen defending his or her store or their vehicle from being stolen or being robbed on the street. When those justifiable homicides by average citizens occur, 54% of those killed were African American men, but also 55%, almost an equal number, of those doing the shooting were African American men. For instance, in Toledo just last week, we had an incident where a patron was removed from a bar. He came back with a gun and opened fire, and the bar owner defended himself with a firearm and shot and killed the angry patron who came back in and was shooting everyone in the bar. And in those situations, again, way disproportionately African American men involved in these violent situations. And that's not politically correct, and it's uncomfortable to talk about, but if we get into this issue, we have to face that reality. So when we find that African American men in these specific neighborhoods where a majority of these shootings are occurring are disproportionately engaged in assaulting the police with deadly weapons, we would expect that the police are going to have a disproportionate number of African American men killed while using those lethal weapons.
You know, recently there was a detective down south that was, he stopped a robbery suspect, got him out of the car. He was disarmed and beaten with his own pistol. He was actually beaten unconscious. And one of the things he said when he came to and they interviewed him later is that the media had him scared to do his job. It was a African American male that he had confronted, and he was afraid to do his job, and him getting his gun taken off him. So the sensation that the media is creating right now is obviously very dangerous, and the data does not back this up at all through your research. Your conservative estimates of 400 looking at the FBI crime information, and then you went and looked at the Center for Disease Control, they still right around 416 deaths a year. I'm uncomfortable personally with the liberal number of 700 where people are doing their own research, but I understand why you gave that number out. But just doing my math in my head, if we're attacked 3,200 times a year on average with a knife or a gun, and we're only using fatal force about 400 times. That's about 1 in 8. About 1 in 8. So that's pretty good as far as it shows great restraint. As a police chief, I'm proud to hear of that. And where I'm very disappointed, I'm a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I'm also a member of the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police. I don't see anyone speaking out nationally, giving out any of this data. I think people are afraid to give the data out for whatever reason. Like you said, it's not politically correct. Here in Shelby Township, we're not afraid to give the data out, and that's why Dr. Johnson's on the show. So I appreciate that very much, Doctor. Now, I do have some other questions for you if you have some time. I want to talk to you about body cameras. Recently, Taser, which is a company out in Scottsdale, Arizona, they obviously make the Taser, but they're also making the Axon body camera. They flew me out to Taser to demo the body cameras. They're basically saying in the next 5 years that at least half the country is going to be wearing body cameras. Now, my situation here in Shelby Township, or our situation, this bedroom community, very little or no diversity. It's pretty much an all-white police force. Actually, it is an all-white police force. In the 9 months that I've been chief here, I've not had one person mention body cameras to me. But I'm also trying to keep my eye on the big picture. What advice would you give for me as chief of police, knowing that the profession is heading this way, but in the meantime, obviously these things are very expensive to maintain and to purchase, and I have no political pressure on me whatsoever. How would you advise me or guide me to handle the situation?
Well, I can give you what the research is showing on the effects of body cameras, and that is that police officers, when they are told to wear a body camera, generally are pretty opposed to it. However, after wearing the body camera, the few studies that have been done, they find that they actually prefer having that body camera on them. Also, it's only been about 3 studies that have been published so far that have looked at the effects of assigning officers to wear body cameras on use of force and citizen complaints and things like that. And all these were done in urban areas, as you mentioned, a lot of diversity, and they have very high crime rates. And what they found in almost all these studies was that when officers were assigned with body cameras, citizen aggression actually decreased, officer complaints decreased, so potentially the officer is double checking their language or their behavior, as well as the citizen, once they know they're on tape, are checking their behavior as well. So it shows a positive outcome for the few studies that have been done, but again, they're different environments than what you have. And if you're in a department that has very few complaints to begin with, I don't know that there will be an outcome from wearing the cameras, that they will reduce complaints if you're not getting very many to begin with. And then there's also the issue that it tends to be overshadowed by we need to have the cameras, because everybody's calling for this. It's far more important to look at the policy implications of when is that camera going to be on. Do your citizens want to be on camera? When your officers are wearing those cameras, it's important for them to have them on if they have them. So when they're responding to a domestic, do you want that information recorded that you are having, potentially it's not a violent situation, it's an argument, but the neighbors called the police, and that's pretty embarrassing to be on public record now as having had that entire incident and the police involvement with it recorded. And then who has access to that with the sunshine laws? So all these policy issues are far more complex than people are thinking through.
I've thought of a few of these issues, obviously, that you've mentioned. Our compliments to complaints right now are at about 10 to 1 since I've been the chief. So very little complaints coming in whatsoever. Obviously, you have a very professional police department here, but we're not dealing with diversity. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Yeah. Another topic I want to talk to you about, hot topic button in law enforcement right now, and actually just in general, is the pursuits. The pursuits, obviously, that end in deaths, and every time I read about one, I cringe myself. I know there's a movement to eliminate police pursuits. What are your thoughts on this? What would the country look like if the criminals find out that if they go out and they run from police, nobody's going to chase them? Obviously, that would be our concern, that you're going to have a little bit more uptick in crime. And what are your thoughts on this? And if you've done any data or research on this?
Well, the research on vehicle pursuits in general is that the number of vehicle pursuits has been going down over the years. Each year, more and more police departments are having more and more restrictive policies on vehicle pursuits, as well as even foot pursuits. A number of police departments have no pursuit policies or limited pursuit policies on foot pursuits. So as a result of that, the number of overall pursuits are actually going down. So it's find it interesting that now all this media attention is following that, much like with the firearms deaths. All of a sudden that this is a hot button issue, when actually for the last 3 decades, if you look at the statistics, the number of pursuits have been going down, deaths from direct pursuits have been going down all this time. And even if the number of pursuits weren't going down, vehicles are safer today. The number of traffic fatalities every year tends to decrease, and that's because vehicles, through their design, are becoming safer and safer. Emergency medicine is becoming better and better for those that are injured to actually survive the crashes. So again, it's just very interesting to me that all of a sudden this is a hot button issue when actually the number of pursuits have been going down over the years. What I just found in the last 2 years here, however, is officer injuries and deaths from vehicle pursuits are actually been going up, but not the officers in direct pursuit. The officers in direct pursuit are getting safer and safer in their pursuits. What unfortunately we're finding, and I did a study that I co-authored with the police chief of Raleigh, North Carolina, after they had a major pursuit incident, was that officers trying to deploy tire deflation devices and officers trying to catch up to the pursuit, to parallel the pursuit, and they're not officially on policy supposed to be involved in that pursuit, but they're just trying to get ahead of it so they can deploy tire deflation devices. Deaths and injuries of officers from those situations are actually been on the increase since about the mid-1990s. So while actual pursuits are getting safer and safer, and the causes, deaths resulting from that have been going down, officers, if you will, supporting the pursuits are becoming more and more injured. And I don't have statistics on citizens being hit by those officers. My guess is that's been on the increase as well. So part of this is if there's dangers from police pursuits, is it something that we need to address with officers that are not in the pursuit but want to be involved in pursuit or trying to help their fellow officers? And that's a noble thing to want to try to help your partners who are involved in the pursuit, but that gets into just a management issue if you're going to allow officers to what they call parallel the pursuit. So there's a very complex issues, I guess, the bottom line here to get into. And it shows that there's apparently tire deflation devices are not the answer either, because so many officers are being injured and killed trying to deploy these tire deflation devices. And when we take someone standing out on the side of a highway with a car coming at them over 100 miles an hour and they're trying to throw out this tire deflation device and then get it back out of the roadway so the officers can continue to follow, that's a pretty dangerous activity. And it's caused a lot of deaths and injuries of officers. Being in the area of the auto industry, just would like to see law enforcement put more pressure on the auto industry to develop electronic kill switches. If you have something like OnStar in your vehicle and you have a way to contact OnStar, tell them to turn that vehicle off. It's involved in an illegal pursuit right now. That would be safest for everyone. Now the argument is, well, then the vehicle's out of control and this person now driving an uncontrollable bullet on the roadway. I need to see some evidence to back that up before I would buy that argument.
Well, and of course, the vehicle was out of control to begin with, is my guess, by running from the police at excessive speeds.
Well, an intoxicated driver or someone without a valid driver's license and things like that.
Of course.
But in general, again, I'm surprised that the attention is drawn to this because the number of pursuits have been going down over the years.
I want to tell you something interesting. My former department, where I retired from after 21 years, the Southfield Police Department, we had an intentional contact policy in place for years. In my 21 years there, they've ran more cars than probably the Dukes of Hazzard did. Not one lawsuit, Doctor, came out of those intentional contacts that were created. Not one. No one was ever killed thank God, during a 21 time period, but no lawsuits. When I became deputy chief and obviously managed the liability, I had a report daily or monthly on the lawsuits that were pending, and none ever came in. And they toned it down from the intentional contact to a where they could do the pit maneuver. So they made it more restrictive to actually make intentional contact. You had to pit first, but the bottom line is it was tremendous the way it worked. Now, when I got to Shelby Township here as a chief, we do not have a intentional contact policy, and we don't even have a pit policy. What they have are the stop sticks, and you call them the tire deflation. So after I read your report, I was very impressed with your report. I had a commander's meeting, and I tried to kill the stop sticks. And the commanders, they're all against it. I'm a newer chief. I kind of listened to them. I shared your data with them and your information. And one of the commanders spoke up, and you'll find this interesting, is he told this story in defense of the stop sticks. And the story was, he got out on the freeway, the car was coming 90 miles an hour, he got out, he laid it down, he just got out of the way before the car ran him over, he just got behind a pole, but it actually did its job and it deflated the thing. So this was his defense of the stop sticks. And I chuckled to myself that this is my reason why we're not to do this. You just risked your life for this. But very interesting, your research, and I thank you, and hopefully I can persuade my commanders to acquiesce in getting rid of these things, because I don't like them.
Well, incidentally, with the pit maneuver that you mentioned of hitting the fender and trying to spin the car around to disable it, with officer deaths from the last 60 years, looked at officer death data, and was not able to find one incident where an officer died from using the pit maneuver. Now, granted, on a surface street in the downtown area, that may not be the most appropriate tactic due to pedestrians and things like that. But it's interesting that every year we have 3 to 5 police officers killed in the line of duty attempting to deploy a stop stick.
Yes.
And we've had none in 60 years ever killed in a pit maneuver tactic.
Well, I know you and the residents are probably wondering right now, why am I not putting a pit maneuver tactic into place? Well, you have to be trained on them, and the training is very expensive. The training would be several $1,000s per officer. I'd have to send up to the state police training school. Then you add on lodging. It's a 4 or 5 day school they have. I've looked into it. It would cost a small fortune. This is a very conservative community, so it's going to take me a little bit more time to build credibility with people that I answer to, the different politicians and my board of trustees. Before that, I think they trust me enough to convincing them to send my officers to pit maneuver school. But hopefully it will come in the next few years is my goal. Next thing I'd like to talk to you about is the so-called militarization of law enforcement. It's a term that is being used and thrown around all over. I've read some very disparaging articles pointing a finger as we're becoming the military. And my take on this is we're adapting to our environment and what we have to deal with. You can't pick a newspaper up on a weekly basis without seeing some nut going up and shooting someplace up. All the weapons that are out there that the criminals maintain. I mean, we're the sheepdogs. We're not the lambs to be led to slaughter, as far as I'm concerned. What are your thoughts on this? Your opinion? Have you done any research on this so-called militarization of law enforcement?
Okay. That's defined different ways. So let's break it down in different ways. As far as having the military equipment, so an armored car, armored vehicle, having assault rifles, things like that, as opposed to wearing a more militaristic uniform. So I'll address each of those issues separately. So as far as the equipment, for this, we're mostly on opinion. There's lots of talk. This is one of these situations where there's lots and lots and lots of talk, but there's no research to back up anything. So there really hasn't been any research on effects of militarization. One study that I can refer to was done by Dr. David Klinger at the University of Missouri at St. Louis about a decade and a half ago now, where he looked at proliferation of SWAT teams. And the accusation being that the more agencies that have SWAT teams, there's kind of a mission creep, if you will, that we have a SWAT team, now we got to use a SWAT team to justify its purpose. So where before we developed a SWAT team as a way to respond to barricaded gunman situations, now they're serving arrest warrants, they're helping with narcotic stings, things like that. What he found, though, was police agencies, when they implemented a SWAT team, which obviously would be an example of militarization, having paramilitary equipment, the body armor, militaristic training, etc., helmets, stuff like that. Well, when an agency developed a SWAT team, actual deaths from use of force went down. Number of use of force incidents actually went down. And the reason for that was Back in the old days, it would be uniformed patrol officers handle a situation where, say for instance, a mentally distraught individual, when they get there, the person's holding a gun on themselves or someone else. Back 50 years ago, the uniformed patrol officers continue to have to handle that. And they're continuing to get calls for service, and the next shift is coming on. And there's a pressure that we need to handle this. And we're just patrol officers. We're with our sidearm and a shotgun and in a uniform like you're wearing right now. And so the pressure is we have to handle this. So eventually they would push the situation where we have to go in and do something. With a SWAT team situation, if you have a SWAT team to call out, the patrol officers can back off, contain the situation, and let SWAT come in and handle it. SWAT's had additional training for that. They're able to contain the situation, and SWAT doesn't matter. They can wait it out. As long as someone's life is not immediately being threatened, like if the person starts trying to shoot their hostages and things, then SWAT will be forced to move in. But in most hostage situations and standoffs with gunmen, some of these last for weeks, some of them last for months that have even made the media, where the police with a SWAT team will just contain this and wait them out. Eventually the person's going to give up and come out in majority of the situations. And that only occurs from this militarized unit with this militarized training. Of course, there's going to be examples people can point to where that's not how things turned out, but the overall trend is that SWAT teams actually result in less force being used. Now, should SWAT be making all the traffic stops in your community? I would say not. And most SWAT teams, as most citizens probably don't know, are made up of people throughout the agency. There may be a detective on an average day or a patrol officer on an average day, a training sergeant, but then when the SWAT call out comes, that's when they're kind of like volunteer firefighters. They put on their SWAT gear and go to work as SWAT team members, and they're not usually full-time SWAT personnel. But having that equipment and that training for those specific types of incidents, what little research is out there shows that actually that's a better situation, a better way to handle these situations.
Okay.
Now, as far as the uniforms becoming more militaristic, you see more and more agencies where the officers are wearing, say, for instance, a military cargo pants uniform or a military fatigue style uniform with their patches on it. There's a number of financial benefits for that. They're much cheaper uniforms to purchase and maintain. They're much easier to keep clean, etc. However, the research is showing it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing.
Okay.
There are a few studies that have been out there that are showing the uniform style that you're wearing right now is what Americans, in their mind's eye, view the police.
Okay.
And they view the military as differently. And remember, we had a war that originally made this country over the military running our lives and our rules in the United States.
Yes.
So we intentionally want to keep the police and the military looking separately. However, that said, there is a time and a place for having to have military tactics and military equipment, especially as you mentioned, you've got someone with a high-powered assault rifle. More and more offenders are getting their hands on body armor. Most of your viewers probably aren't aware that a typical police officer's body armor that they wear on a daily basis will not stop most assault rifle rounds or even hunting rifle rounds. It'll go right through the body armor. So the type of body armor that will stop those types of rounds are bigger, bulkier, military style. They wear them on the outside of their clothes. Excuse me. And those are the types of equipment that they need to deal with these types of assailants. So there is a need for it, but I would have to say there are some agencies that can be pointed to as examples of maybe going too far with it.
I understand. Doctor, I can't thank you enough for driving up from Toledo. By the
Sure,
way,
my
I'm a big Rocket fan. I appreciate it.
Me too.
I look forward to having you on the show again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Doctor.